This is one of those occasions where both the gospel and the first reading are so rich. I really struggled this morning with which one to reflect upon. And all morning I was convinced I was diving into this guy who comes into the synagogue. But Hannah's witness is so impressive, it's difficult to let it pass by. So let's talk about Hannah. We heard yesterday that she's in a difficult spot because she's been barren in her marriage to Elkanah, while Elkanah's other wife, Peninnah, is just pumping out children. And in ancient Near East, especially among the Jews, evidence of God's blessings was the gift of life. And so it's not simply that Peninnah is able to build a family and Hannah's not, and perhaps on a natural level there's this perception that she's failing in her role of wife, but more than that is this perception of like being cursed by God. And Peninnah is ruthless about that. So she's harping on Hannah all the time. Every chance she gets, she's gloating to Hannah's face, and it's destroying Hannah from the inside. And this particularly comes about when they make their journeys to the temple, or there was no temple, to Shiloh, where this tent of meeting is, where Eli the priest and his sons are ministering so that they can offer their sacrifices. And when that happens, Elkanah's giving his portions to Peninnah, and he's giving a double portion to Hannah. He loves her. She's prized to him. But nonetheless, her heart is still broken. Hannah's name in Hebrew, it means grace. So what should catch our attention is her response to suffering in her life. You notice in her relationship with Peninnah, they don't scrap at each other. There's no fighting back. And that doesn't mean that Hannah is a doormat. It means that with great power and personal character, she's taking suffering into herself and not allowing evil to issue forth from her. This is not evidence of weakness. This is a strength that few people know and understand. And she's allowing this suffering, rather than to become a moment of self-righteousness to flare up, it directs her attention to the Lord. She acknowledges her powerlessness. She recognizes that justice is God's and that only God can rescue her from this situation. And so today, we see her on one of these journeys to Shiloh with her family, and she is pouring her heart out to God. And as if this woman wasn't suffering enough, here's Eli, who's a terrible father, and that's a whole other conversation, and his sons are terrible human beings. He looks at Hannah, who's praying non-verbally, but her lips are moving, which to us doesn't matter, but back then you would have prayed out loud. So he assumes very rashly that she's drunk, offended that she would come into such a holy place, and just rashly accuses her of deep offenses, and he's way off on this. And she's already broken. And again, rather than say, "Who do you think you are? This is why nobody comes to Shiloh," and just start ripping him apart, she, in grace, looks at him and goes, "Please don't think that your servant is a never-do-well. I am suffering and I am pouring my heart out to God." The grace, if we could put it into a virtue, would be meekness. And that's a word that most people don't understand. Meekness is not weakness. Meekness is mastery over one's interior life to the extent that we don't return evil for evil. That we can take that in and with a kind of spiritual jujitsu, lift that up to God and find freedom and peace in the process. And Hannah is doing this in a way that no one else in this narrative is doing. And as a result, she's not only won Elkanah's heart, she actually wins over Eli here. What's his response to her grace? He says, go in peace and may the Lord answer your prayer. And that's exactly what happened. She goes, she prays with Elkanah, and she conceives a son. And the son that she conceives is no just guy on the bus. It's Samuel, who's going to be the last of the judges, who's going to anoint the first king, and he's ultimately going to be the one that anoints King David as a child. He's going to play a very serious role in salvation history. But my point is that would that have happened if she had responded differently? The Lord hears her prayer because of her humility, her faith, and her virtue. If she responded as a witch to all of these situations, I suggest to you that the Lord would not have blessed her in the way that he did. In fact, she becomes for us, just to bring it all the way home, a type of Mary. Hannah's name means grace. Mary is she who is full of grace. Hannah suffers bitterly, and the word bitterness is used. Mary's name means bitterness. It comes from Miriam. Both of them have a son of providence in a miraculous pregnancy. And then in the psalm that you heard today, which actually wasn't a psalm, it's Hannah's prayer of praise when she conceives and bears forth a son, that Mary's Magnificat in Luke's gospel is actually going to replicate it. And if you put them line by line next to each other, the connection is very obvious. Our Lady is Our Lady of Sorrows. And so what do we take away from all of this? Well, suffering is inevitable. It's inevitable. There's misunderstandings, there's injustice, there's evil. We're living in a world that does not belong to God. It belongs to the devil. Chaos is a part of life. And we see, culturally speaking, a justification for outrage that expresses itself oftentimes in violence, but also in bearing false witness. One is even validated in their lies because they're at the purpose of a higher moral good. None of this is reflective of God's will or Hannah's behavior. And so I think for us, as we encounter such a great witness as Hannah, it really is an opportunity, and this is hard, it's very hard for me, to ask God for the docility to engage the injustices and the chaos of life with a meekness that makes sure, as Francis will end up praying, that we remain instruments of his peace, so that where there is hatred, we sow love. Where there is wrong, we can help bring understanding. And where there is despair, hope, so that God's activity can always be channeled through us, and we find ourselves not like Eli, becoming an obstacle to another person's path.